Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Stuart Cohen from the Cybersecurity Collaborative. We will get started in just a couple of minutes on today's open webinar on improving your password game with the Cyber Readiness Institute and the CISO from Taco Bell. Thank you very much for attending today's session, and we're just waiting for a few of your colleagues to register and to get logged in, and then we will go ahead and get started. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Stuart Cohen from the Cybersecurity Collaborative. Thank you so much for joining us today on our open webinar. Today, this is the third of 4 webinars that we were doing with the Cyber Readiness Institute around their 4 pillars. Today, we will be talking about improving your password game with Kirsten Todd, the Managing Director from the Cyber Readiness Institute, and Matt Kraus, the CISO for Taco Bell. Before I introduce the 2 of them, just to remind people that are used to coming on our webinars, if you're one of our members, this is not a confidential conversation. So anything you hear on this webinar, you can repeat to anybody, you can talk to anybody about it, you can use the information as freely both within your organization and outside your organization as you wish. Also, as I said, this is the third of 4. We will be having the 4th one in November on protecting your data from USBs and other dangers that we will be co-hosting with CRI in November. You can register for that one off our website as well. As always, we will have presentations from our 2 presenters today, and then we will have a Q&A session. If you have a question, please submit it into the chat box or the question box, and we will make sure we get to it and address it either during the Q&A on today's call, or if need be, we will get back to you with your answers to your question after today's session. As always, we will have the recording available, as well as in the next few days, a written summary that we'll be able to distribute to anybody who was registered or anybody who wasn't registered that wants that. And you can also contact the Cyber Readiness Institute for copies of that as well. We will also be having a couple of poll questions that we put on every one of our open webinars. We would appreciate it if you responded to those poll questions. We review those answers with our Corporate Leadership Council, with our Community Leadership Council, and with the CISOs that founded the Cybersecurity Collaborative. It is important that they see your interactions with us. Are we meeting what's important to them? One of the reasons we do open webinars like this is because we want to give back to the community. We want to make people aware of what's going on, and we want to be able to provide them education, whether they are a member of the Cybersecurity Collaborative or not. So I'd appreciate it in advance you filling out the poll questions. If you have a question, please put it in the chat box or the question box, and we will do our best to get to those. And with that, I will introduce Kirsten Todd, the Managing Director of the Cyber Readiness Institute, to kick off today's session about improving your password game. Kirsten?
Thanks very much, Stuart, and thanks very much to you and the Cybersecurity Collaborative for your continued partnership and collaboration. As you and I have discussed, I believe you were number 1. I haven't got to get you a certificate, the first champion that we brought on, and I'll explain what that is. But the partnership with what you're doing has been tremendously constructive, and we're grateful for that. So I'm going to take a few minutes to first introduce the Cyber Readiness Institute. And if we could go to the next slide, please, Devin. The Cyber Readiness Institute was a follow-on to the work that a few of us did on the Independent Bipartisan Commission on Enhancing National Cybersecurity in 2016. And this effort was intended to specifically, as a follow-up to that commission report, focus on small and medium-sized businesses. with the idea that we would convene senior leaders of global companies and their value chain partners from across sectors to share practices in order to inform the development of free tools and resources for small businesses. And the idea here is that obviously by helping small businesses globally as interdependencies proliferate, we're improving the security of global value chains. We could go to the next slide, please. And so one of the ways that we started to do that was to partner with senior executives from companies, as I mentioned, but specifically those from large sectors. So our founding co-chairs are MasterCard, Microsoft, PSP Partners, and the Center for Global Enterprise. And the Center for Global Enterprise is represented by Sam Palmisano, the retired CEO of IBM, and also the vice chair of the commission. And PSP Partners, the chairman of that is Penny Pritzker, who served as the US Secretary of Commerce for the commission. Since our launch, we've brought in companies such as General Motors, Citigroup, ExxonMobil, and Maersk, to name a few. And again, the idea here is that by bringing the large companies together, we can create resources that help small businesses, because what we do know now is that small businesses have more in common with small businesses across sectors than they do with the large companies within their own sector. So cross-sector information sharing becomes extremely valuable to small businesses, and what our mission is seeking to do. Next slide, please. So one of the ways that we are doing this is we're partnering, as I mentioned, in addition to the members, but with champions like the Cybersecurity Collaborative to help distribute our information, our program, which I'll get into in a moment. But because we are a lean organization and the reach that we want goes far beyond any individual or even a group of individual networks, we're focused on partnering with companies and organizations and industry associations across the globe. And right now we have over 50 champions with whom we've partnered. Next slide, please. And so what I'm going to talk a little bit about is our program, but the approach that we've taken is in order to help small and medium-sized businesses, we don't want to offer opportunities or ideas that require investment, that require financial investment in technologies, that require a different set of skills than what the small business already has. So we determined that we would focus on 4 issues: passwords and authentication, which we're going to talk about today, patching or software updates, phishing, and USB use. And the idea here is that by creating baseline cybersecurity policies that focus on the human element, the human behavior piece to this, and a small business, whether it's 2 people or 200, can create a foundation of security upon which they can grow and build more mature systems. But that by engaging individuals, engaging the employees, you're creating this foundation. And so our tools focus on preventative measures, but then also practical incident responses to create resilience. And our focus is creating a cyber readiness culture, again, by emphasizing this personal responsibility and accountability. Additionally, we look at reducing cyber risk in practical ways that are aligned with the mission of the organization and the key priorities and the assets, because it doesn't help, obviously, if you're given an approach that is not aligned with what your key functions are. And the program which we've developed to focus on these 4 issues, which I'll get into in a moment, is self-guided. And I'll walk through that briefly again. But the idea here is that by focusing on human behavior, you create a culture. We no longer in this day and age, I believe, have something called a cyber workforce, because everybody is using a phone, a smart tablet, a laptop in order to do their job, whether it's a very physical infrastructure job and people are in the field fixing utility lines, or whether it's sitting behind a desk. Everything has a cyber connection. And so there are basic elements of security that each individual needs to have awareness of. And you don't have to be a technology expert in order to do well at these. This is about the basics and setting the foundation for the basics. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, these 4 issues all revolve around what the person can do. And so again, we're going to talk about passwords and authentication, but patching, we focus on software updates and the notices that come to you. Phishing, we focus on education. And USBs and removable devices, we talk about educating individuals so that they understand what their role is in the overall enterprise security. Next slide, please. So the program itself, as I mentioned, is a self-guided 5-stage program. And what it focuses on is identifying at the outset an individual within the company who, what I'll say, has sort of high emotional intelligence within the organization, knows how the organization responds, how to affect change. This person typically is not a technical expert. It's not somebody in the IT department. It could be the head of HR, or if it's a small business, oftentimes the head of HR is also the head of finance or general counsel. But it's a person who understands how the organization works. And the analogy that I'll make is after 9/11, when we were focused a lot on crisis and incident response, you saw a lot of companies that were identifying individuals within the organization who were responsible for the physical security of the company, creating evacuation plans, creating emergency response plans. These were not individuals who were hired specifically for that function. They already had other functions within the organization, but they knew how to communicate. And so within the organization. And so that's what a cyber leader does. So we start the program with identifying a cyber leader, and then we help the organization through the self-guided program not only learn about the 4 issues, but help them identify what's important to protect. Because the idea, as I shared earlier, is that the mission of your organization doesn't necessarily have to have cyber in the name, but the cyber infrastructure is typically critical to your mission. And we walk through policy templates for these 4 issues, which then the small business can customize for its own organization. And then we help with the rollout, with getting commitment, not just from senior executives, but throughout the organization. And in the 5th stage, we talk about measuring success. So we have a qualitative survey that we offer in the 2nd stage, and we ask that same set of questions, that survey, in the 5th stage, so that individuals can see what their improvement has been. And since we've launched this, which was in December of 2018, so we've had about 9 months in action, we're finding that about 79% of companies report a high impact from the program, and up to 90% report having a significant impact. So we're getting broad feedback on impact and also on use. And again, this program is really focused on working with individuals on the human behavior piece, the recognition that for a long time, small businesses were essentially given tools in cybersecurity that were minimized from what was given to the large businesses, and that you could take the large business best practice and shrink it down. But I think Stuart's heard me say this a couple times. The analogy that I make to this is like pediatric medicine. For a long time, we just minimized what we did for adults, for children, but now we understand pediatric medicine to be a distinct discipline. Similarly, small business cybersecurity is a distinct discipline. Small businesses have different resource restraints, they have different priorities, and while there's a lot in common and can complement the large businesses, when you're talking about creating a foundation of security, these pieces are very important. And so for the purposes of our conversation today, and I know that Matt's going to be going into greater detail, but the password and authentication piece is critical. And so, as I mentioned, this is one of our 4 issues. And the key part of allowing the right to people to access systems, resources, and information, a key component of that is obviously access through passwords and authentication. And so what we talk about in our template is to use passwords on all devices. We have the approach, what we hear now very much is around 12-character passwords. There is guidance by the National Institute of Standards and Technology that talks about a 64-character passphrase. We have put forth that recommendation, but in our feedback loop with small businesses, we hear that oftentimes there's not enough space for 64-character passphrases. So we're now in touch with NIST and with an identity management effort that came out of the White House a few years ago to have the right recommendation. Passphrases are typically the best way to go because they're easier to remember. And the science right now says that characters and special characters and numbers don't necessarily make something more resilient. And working with entities to then recommend what this passphrase looks like. But the broad recommendation is a 64-character passphrase, and then reducing that obviously based on the space and availability. We also share that you never use the same passphrase for personal and professional uses. and to always enable two-factor authentication whenever possible. So those are some of the basics that you'll see in our summary of this template. Next slide, please. And so as we wrap up, I encourage each of you after the presentation to go online to the cyberreadinessinstitute.org. In the upper right-hand corner, you can register for free for the program. And just as an administrative note, we're in the process of updating the website between tonight and Monday. So you will be able to access all of the information during that time, but you won't be able to start the program until Monday. And so but you can go online and you can test it out and see what's there. And don't hesitate to reach out to me, or there are different opportunities on the website to ask questions. But our hope is to get as many small businesses to use the program, because we're only as good as the users and the feedback that we get. And again, this is all free. And our hope is, in addition to that, to ensure that we are touching small businesses around the world, and by doing so, hoping to improve the security of global value chains. Stuart, thanks very much. And at this point, I will turn it over to Matt.
Thanks, Kirsten. Yeah, so as Stuart was mentioning at the beginning, I'm Matt Krause, CISO of Taco Bell here in Irvine, California. We are, for those of you on the call, we are part of a broader company, Yum Brands, headquartered in Louisville. We also have our sister companies, KFC and Pizza Hut. The reason I bring that up is that as we go through this, we're going to talk about some of the password measures that we have put in place, not only at Taco Bell, but more broadly across all of our Yum brands. And all in, we are the largest restaurant company in the world. I think this year we are going to open our 50,000th restaurant somewhere in the world. We don't know yet where it's going to be, but it's out there just waiting to be opened. But a lot of the techniques that we're going to talk about that we've used on a very large global scale are immediately applicable to small and medium-sized businesses as well. So we're really not that far off. And I appreciate what Kirsten was talking about with small business cybersecurity being a distinct discipline. I agree wholeheartedly that it is. But I think that in some areas there are basics and fundamental hygiene issues that are tackled very much the same way, regardless of your workforce size or your company size. So if we can go to the next slide. What I have up here, you might wonder why we have a picture of Rocky standing on top of the steps of the Philadelphia Art Museum. The thought process that went into this particular cover slide was everybody remembers that particular scene in that movie, in that moment, what was happening with Rocky. Rocky was a blue-collar guy, didn't have a lot of resources, but had an incredible work ethic and an insurmountable challenge ahead of him. He knew what he had to accomplish, and he didn't know how he was going to get there. But he knew some of the right steps to take, and he was willing to put into the work. And of course, in the end, we know how that story unfolds. But this moment, this image here is kind of iconic of, I think, the struggle that we are all in, regardless of the size of our organization. If we do the right things, if we're smart about how we approach this problem, it's not an insurmountable issue at all. Let's go ahead and dive in. We're to the next slide here. So what I put up here, we have a collection of just a couple of headlines from this year already. We can see they're all related to data breaches. We've got 6 of them, ranging from very, very large, at Capital One, 100 million customers, down to very small, a single person who was defrauded a couple of $1,000s. The one thing that these all have in common, and again, this is just a sample, all of these incidents of cybercrime all tie back to unauthorized access through passwords. And so, again, it doesn't matter how big your organization is, how small your organization is, or the same with your user base. This is a universally pervasive problem that we really need everybody, cyber leaders, CISOs, CEOs, individual users, as well as all of us and all of our counterparts in our personal lives, to tackle this and take the personal responsibility to get this problem under control. The good news is, if we take a look at the next slide, this is really a problem of just getting the basics right, but the stats aren't very encouraging. At the end of last year, the very beginning of this year is when these stats were pulled out. we found that 31% of organizations still didn't require default passwords to be changed on their applications or their infrastructure. So about 1 in 3, you know, I don't know, we've got about the number of us on the call. If we take 1 in 3 of us, statistically speaking, that's the number of people that are still using default passwords out there. And all those default passwords are published, they're well known, not only to administrators, but to criminals as well. They're just as easy to access. And even worse, 41% still don't use multi-factor authentication for accessing even administrative accounts on their platforms. The good news here, though, is that neither of these problems require very much budget, if any budget, to resolve. If you're an Office 365 shop, if you're an AWS shop, if you're an Azure shop, or whatever your flavor of infrastructure is, all of those platforms already provide multi-factor authentication for free through their platform for administrative accounts. It's just a matter of going in and making the change to actually get it turned on, and then training your administrators or your user base about how they can actually leverage that technology and why they should bother. So next slide, please. Good news here. This is not a budget issue. This is not a resource issue. This is really just an issue of having the will and the political courage to make change in your organization and to get these problems under control by starting with the very basics. It is a hygiene issue. It's no different from patching or some of the other topics that Kirsten was discussing that are being covered on other calls. And it's really just one that we collectively have a responsibility for getting under control. Next slide, please. So very quickly, I wanted to talk through kind of the top 5 techniques that we have used here, not only at Taco Bell, but again, like I mentioned, our parent company, Yum Brands, and my sister brands, KFC and Pizza Hut, both domestically and around the globe as well. These are not expensive technologies to implement. Of course, your needs may vary, and there are lots of solutions available in the marketplace that will vary in terms of cost and effort to implement. But the good news is there are low-cost or even in some cases no-cost solutions for all of these. One of the biggest things that we've implemented recently, and we're actually in the midst of a rollout right now, and I'd like to talk through that a little bit, is a password manager. Password managers are very low friction once people get accustomed to the idea of using one, and they're very, very easy to implement. And what I've found as I've held meetings and training webinars and things like that internally here is that once my users understand how to use the password manager and why they should be using it, even the non-technology users really actually grow to love using a password manager, because I've had them come up to me after the fact and say, I know that this is a problem. I know that I'm reusing passwords because I have 150 different logins and I can't remember 150 different usernames and passwords, especially complex ones, but I don't know what to do about it. So with that, what we've done is we've given them a tool to empower themselves to go ahead and make those improvements. And in one case, an early adopter in our pilot group, we had a user outside of our technology group. I forget if he was in legal or HR, but the specific technology that we implemented has a lot of really great back-end reporting where we're able to analyze a rolled-up sort of security score for this user's passwords, whether they're reusing passwords, whether they're using strong passwords, and so on. This individual came to me and said, at the beginning of this pilot, I had a security score of 17%. I was reusing passwords all over the place. My passwords were very basic, and I knew it was a problem, but I didn't know what to do about it. And within one afternoon of adopting our password manager, he was able to move his score all the way up to 95%, simply by leveraging the strength of generating random and secure passwords and then storing those inside of his password manager. A lot of the tools that are available, and there are several, we're going to talk about a few, but there's LastPass, Dashlane, 1Password, pick your flavor. They all basically do the same thing. What we found was really important in our selection process was the ability to have your personal passwords and your professional passwords separate but combined in the same tool. So as you're evaluating tools, I would say depending on the nature of your organization and the appetite of your users, you may want to consider looking for that as a requirement. In this case, a user creates an account. They can register a personal account along with it. All of their passwords are stored within the same plugin or password manager in their browser. And if they leave the organization, their professional passwords stay behind and their personal passwords stay with them. And the tool is actually free for personal use or even for limited company use. So that's something that they can take forward into their personal lives and just carry on with them. So in that way, we're actually impacting not only the security of our own organization, but we're more broadly making an impact on password hygiene around the entire user community. And I've actually gone through, when I've done training on this, I make it very personal to the audience. You know, we don't really talk about their Yum passwords or their Taco Bell passwords very much. What we do is we talk about their Netflix passwords and their Amazon passwords and their Gmail passwords. And that resonates a lot more with that audience, because what I find is that users typically tend to look at us as the security guy or the technology guy or gal in the organization, as that's your problem to make sure that our stuff is secure. But suddenly when you turn the tables and say, hey, look at your Facebook password and your Netflix password and so on, and demonstrate that they're probably the same, that opens a lot of doors, and that really wakes a lot of people up to the fact that this is a problem. And when you demonstrate why it's a problem, when we talk about password reuse and what is credential stuffing and how could you unwittingly be a victim to this, we find that we get a much broader adoption of this technology. So that is really a great tool to implement. Like I said, very low friction. It does require a training component. And one of the training points that we always make sure that we make is you don't want to use a password manager just to store the same fluffy 123 password that you're already using across all of your accounts. You really want to leverage the full power of this tool to generate very long random passphrases. Like Kirsten said, 64-character passphrases are really the absolute best, and most of the password managers can support that. So what this allows people to really just have different passwords and not even really know what their passwords are. I always say, if you know what your password is, it's not strong enough. And once people get used to adopting this, we found really, really solid uptake, and I think that you will as well in your organization. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is multi-factor authentication. We already touched a little bit on how some of the major platform providers offer this for free, just baked into their service. Strongly recommend that everybody go out today and enable that for your administrative accounts. For your user accounts, you know, you may or may not be able to do that for free. It will depend on your particular platform. But again, there are very good low-cost, or in some cases even no-cost authentication apps out there. Google Authenticator is a very good one. Authy, we use Duo. YubiKeys are also very good. And some of these require, you know, a license fee per month per user, but they're typically very low. Some of these, like I said, are free and can be integrated into your applications. If you want some technical reading, NIST 863 gives some very good guidance, and I think Kirsten mentioned earlier there's some additional guidance coming specifically on password strength, but 863 talks about identity management more specifically and multi-factor authentication. If you have a consumer-facing application, such as we do with TacoBell.com and our mobile apps, SMS is probably the best two-factor authentication that you can use for consumers, although we have to recognize that it's really not foolproof. You know, we all just saw the headlines last week, I think, what happened at Twitter with Jack Dorsey. SMS two-factor can be targeted and can be stolen through SIM jacking or other techniques if somebody really knows who they're going to be after. So I would strongly recommend against using this for things like administrative or highly privileged users, because it doesn't take a whole lot for an attacker to figure out who your administrators are through open source research on LinkedIn or whatever the case may be, and then find out that person's cell phone number, which is also very easy to find out on the open market, and then just target them specifically for their second factor. So if you're looking to protect administrative accounts, highly privileged accounts, I recommend not using SMS, but for customer-based accounts, that's really where you're going to get the biggest traction and the biggest uptake, because everybody understands how to use a cell phone, how to use text messages, and most people, frankly, are used to this by now. This is another thing that I build into my training webinars that I do internally, where we talk about don't just use two-factor internally here within the company, but you need to go out today and enable it on all of your own personal accounts, on your bank accounts, on your social media accounts, everywhere that you can. And I give a couple of specific examples where I've done this and where I know that it's been effective. But again, making that message personal really helps to drive adoption and helps people to turn the corner on understanding that this isn't just a company security thing. This really affects me as an individual in my personal and private life. And so I need to get on board with this. Once they make that mental turn, I find that adoption to professional usage of this comes very naturally to people. And they're frankly very appreciative of the fact that we're giving them tools to help solve this problem. To the extent that you're able, I highly recommend enabling SSO or SAML for a lot of reasons. Like I mentioned, it's a lot easier to remember one single set of very strong credentials than it is to remember, a dozen or 100 different logins and passwords for all of your different corporate applications. If you have that many, if you don't have that many, still even half a dozen is harder to remember, and people are much more likely to fall victim to password reuse. As well as this reduces your attack surface. If your SaaS providers redirect their authentication back to your SSO page, guess what? Now I've shrunk the problem down and I have one place to defend and one place to monitor for attacks instead of depending on all of my third-party vendors or whatever the case may be to do all of that for me, and then I have to be concerned about maintaining their compliance and so forth. So SSO really, people tend to view it as more of a convenience factor, but it really is a security factor, and one that, again, doesn't take very much to implement. Kirsten talked about passphrases, not passwords. The math has proven out that a longer passphrase made up of very common words is, number one, much easier to remember, but number two, way more secure in terms of how much entropy is in that string and so forth than a password. So wherever possible, I strongly recommend that you enforce that. And then the last one, and the real thing that we're trying to fight here all across the globe, is password reuse. And we've talked a little bit about that already. People can only remember so many things. And so password reuse is a very natural consequence of the way that our brains are wired biologically, that people are just naturally going to gravitate toward that. If we have a customer-facing application, again, a really good way to fight this is just to stop accepting breached credentials altogether. Troy Hunt, who runs HaveIBeenPwned.com, offers a free API integration to anybody who wants to integrate with that, so that when your customers are registering on your site, you can actually make a call with their username and password out to his database and say, hey, is this pair already breached? Has this been compromised someplace else? And if so, then you get the answer back and you can write the decision logic in your application to do something there. If you're not able to actually go the step of the full API integration for whatever reason, what a lot of companies do is they'll just download his database. He makes it freely available. They can just download the database, they run it, they salt it and hash it according to their specifications, and then just start looking for matches. And when they find matched accounts, reach out and do something with that account according to what your internal policies are. But again, that's a really, really great way. We have that tool available, and I think we all have a responsibility to do something with it. Troy's kind of made it his own personal mission to shed some light on what's been breached and what is out there so that we can all do something with it. And I think we have a responsibility as cyber leaders to do just that. So these are really the top 5 things. We have done all of these at Taco Bell. And again, they're not very expensive. They're not something that needs to be overly complicated or overly sophisticated. The individual technologies that you use may differ from the technologies that we use, but the fundamentals are exactly the same. And that's really what I want to get across with this slide today is we're not that far apart. Big company, small company, global company, down to even a sole proprietor. All of us can do these things, and all of us really need to be doing these things today, and can do them regardless of our budget or resource constraints, because for the most part, they really don't take very much of those two to implement. Next slide, please.
And Matt,
Yeah.
before you go further, we did
We
get
did
a
get a
question
question
specifically
specifically.
about training. How do you make people aware of these issues, and how do you get them? And it's kind of looks like what you're going to walk into, but it was specifically about that.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's actually a really great segue. I've held a number of training sessions internal to the company here, and I've also held webinars because we have a broad franchisee audience that I can't necessarily visit in person. But, you know, brown bag lunches work really well. I've done a lot of those this year already. Just, you know, pick a date, find a conference room, invite people in, and walk through a deck and really tell the story of why is this so important. And what I always do is I lead with those, they're not always the same headlines, but I lead with the headlines that I led with today. And the reason I do that is because most people in the room have seen, if they haven't seen those particular headlines, we've all seen and heard stories this year fairly recently about data breaches. And people want to know, how is this happening? What's going on? What can we do about it? So beginning to tell that story about this is how these happen, and breaking down, you don't have to go into the whole cyber kill chain and get very technical unless you have that kind of audience and the appetite to receive that. But training your users on specifically, it all comes back to weak passwords and weak authentication. This is how the criminals are operating, and I usually tell the story about have I been pawned? I tell the story about collection number 1, collection number 2. Most people in the audience have not heard of those things, but when I say 700 million emails and passwords were posted online for sale, that kind of opens their eyes, and I usually get a lot of people saying, whoa, that's a lot. And then follow up with, you know, collection 2 was 2.2 billion and so on. And just walk through the steps of, if I am a criminal actor, what am I going to do here? You know, the first step is I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy these lists online. The second step is I'm going to run these lists through some kind of a checking script, and there's services available for sale. It doesn't take really any technical sophistication because password checking is available as a service. You can just go buy it online, and you get so many bots and so many passwords for so many dollars. And at that point, what you get is the validated list of credentials and sites that you know work. What the criminals do then, for the most part, is they'll just go out on the black market and resell those. So it's really a little business that they have built for themselves. They take a raw good, they do some processing to it, and then they resell it as a commodity. When I walk through that story, that makes it very, very personal for people, because they realize that their own personal email accounts, Netflix accounts, whatever, even bank accounts, are probably in those lists with numbers like that. And so then I pivot right into, so how do we stop that? How do you personally stop this in your personal life? And going back to Kirsten's note earlier about making this a personal responsibility for people rather than something that's generically the company's responsibility, I've had a lot of really good luck with that. So I'd recommend brown bag lunches, hallway conversations to follow up, and that's kind of what I'm going to get into right now. And, you know, hold a few of them throughout the year, because not everybody in your organization is going to be able to make it. And it would be good even to record it if you have a broader audience, or to share this presentation today. If anybody has specific questions on how to train or what they should be training towards specific to their organization, Stuart, I want to make myself available. They can reach out to me. Somebody can find me on LinkedIn, or you can reach out through Stuart, and he can get the question over to me, and we can have a conversation about what I think you can do specific to your organization and understanding what the landscape is there. But the marketplace solutions that are out there.
Sorry, Matt, this is Kirsten. I'm just one quick comment on that, because I know it was a question, and not to interrupt, but when one of the members, in addition to the brown bags, we got feedback that having online training in addition to those can be very helpful for the point that you just made, which was then you have a library of a resource that people can access at their convenience. So if they develop a question about it, or they're looking for guidance and they can't make it to a physical discussion, obviously in person and the ability to have those conversations are preferable. But one of our members just said, yeah, but don't lose sight of the value of creating a library of resources, whether it's just a quick video or some type of online effort, which was new to us, and I think just important to mention given the question, in addition to what you're saying, because I certainly agree that where you are and how you're doing is preferable. And if you can do it with your size, I think small businesses can too. I also think the ability to hold on to that knowledge and have it stored can be helpful. But please continue. Thank you.
Absolutely. You know, building that online resource, we use an internal social media site that I make a lot of posts on, and I will link to. In fact, I will probably link to this presentation, in fact. But I will frequently post password tips, password related news, things along those lines, as well as links to specific training on the technologies that we are using or announcements about that. One organization that I visited over the summer actually had printed collateral posted all around their, and they were a fairly small business, but they had signs posted around the office there. And they had worked with their marketing team probably, because they made them very catchy. They made them, I think in that particular instance, they were themed after World War II propaganda posters, you know, loose lips, sink ships, those kind of things. So that draws people's eyes and it gets their attention, and it just serves as a reminder if somebody's walking down the hallway for a meeting or standing in the kitchen getting a cup of coffee or whatever. It's really good to have those reminders out there. I know that there's some available for free online, or you can just develop your own to suit your own organization's culture, whatever's going to fit there. But as many ways as we can leverage to get this message out, I think will suit us all the better. So building an online library is definitely good. Not everybody's going to always use that, especially outside of a couple of the more tech-savvy departments. So it's good to make yourselves known as champions of this cause and a resource that people can come to you with, as well as, you know, even posting things around the building, like I said, that some other companies have done. All of those are really good messages to just keep reinforcing this over and over and over, because about the time that you think you're absolutely sick and tired of talking about password security is probably the time that the other people are just starting to pick it up. We really have to continue singing this song. And that's what I wanted to talk about here is we all have a voice in our organization, and our company's hired us to use that voice and to be that resource. So we can post things online and we can build online training and digital catalogs, and we should, but we should also just have honest one-on-one conversations with people or hallway chats with people and say, hey, what did you think about that two-factor authentication training that we just had? Or, you know, what do you think about this phishing email that we all just got, or something like that? Being that resource and making yourself known as the local expert on the subject, I think you're going to find that people know that this is a problem. They just don't know what to do about it. So if we offer them some of those tools, and if we offer them the idea that we have a person here that knows what to do about that, I should walk down the hall and talk to them, or I should give them a phone call or shoot them an email, we really can make a lot of progress on this if we just use our voice and make ourselves known as the local resource and as the champion for this. Just continue talking about it. And also training. If you're not using some sort of simulated phishing training, because as we know, the majority of this credential theft usually starts with phishing, recommend that you do. And there are commercial tools available that we use because we're at scale. I've done this, however, when I led very small teams where I was the only cybersecurity practitioner in a previous company, and I actually just made it myself. I wrote the email myself, I spoofed the from address myself, and I sent it out to the organization. And it included a link that tracked who clicked on it and then reported back to me, and there was some follow-up that I had to do. It was a little bit more work. That's why there are marketplace solutions that take care of this for us. But if you don't have the budget for something like a Cofense or Wombat, strongly recommend that you at least try something. Just even if you write it yourself and just see who replies to it. Many companies, including ours, are starting to tie this to some specific consequences. I know there's a company here in the local Southern California area that actually embeds ransomware into their mock phishing emails. Now they're a very large distributed company, so they had to get everybody's attention very, very fast. And what better way than locking up everybody's computer and making them take the walk of shame down to the help desk and say, I'm sorry, I clicked on the thing. Would you please unlock my computer? We haven't gone to that extreme, but we do tie ours to performance year-end, performance review, and there are consequences up to just losing access to email and conversations with senior leaders in the company. So if you're training, you should be tying your training to consequences, because you'll get a little bit of buzz the very first time or maybe the second time, but after that, people will start to ignore it unless you have HR and organizational tie-in to implement some kind of a consequence, even if it's just, you've got to go talk to this person who's the security guy or security leader in our company, and have a 30-minute conversation. That alone is probably enough, and again, doesn't cost anything and doesn't take a whole lot of tie-in, but it does take some organizational support there. Of course, always being on the lookout for new methods. The criminal actors are constantly pivoting and they're constantly changing what they're doing. We need to be on the lookout for that, staying abreast, and I think all of you on the phone are doing that by dialing into this webinar today. So please just continue to do that and share the word of any additional training within your community. And then, like I said, lastly, just being a resource, being the expert in the space, knowing what you're doing, and letting people know that this is not an insurmountable problem. If we tie this all the way back to Rocky at the very beginning, he didn't have a lot of resources, but he had a really good trainer, and he had a huge heart and a great work ethic, and he was able to get the job done. And if he was able to get it done, I think we're all able to get it done. So in closing, just a couple of things about what we should all take away and do immediately. And just to recap, make certain that you're changing default passwords on all of your infrastructure, on all of your new applications. If any of you are using IoT devices in your organization, IP-based video cameras, things along those nature, please make certain that you have a policy that those default passwords get reset, because all of that is widely available and they're just additional computers on your network. Using a password manager. There are several available. Like I said, I mentioned a few: LastPass, Dashlane, 1Password. There are others available, and they come at different price points. Some are free for personal use or for small businesses. But train your users on why they should be using those and how, not just to collect the insecure passwords they already have, but to actually generate and store secure passwords so that they would never really even have to think about it. You're reducing user friction there, and you're improving security at the same time. Enable multi-factor authentication everywhere you can, not just as the technology leaders within your organization for administrative accounts, but encourage your users to turn that on for their personal lives as well. We're at a point now where customers are expecting this. People are asking for it. If there's an organization that is public-facing that doesn't have something like this, your users are probably expecting it already. So start having those conversations internally. And then the last one, really, and the most important, is just educate and talk to your users about why this is important, what they need to be doing, and steps that they need to be taking. So with that, I know we have a few minutes for Q&A. I'm going to turn it back over to Stuart. But again, I just want to reiterate, if anybody has any follow-up questions after this, if something comes to your mind after we drop off the call today, please reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn, shoot me a message. You can find me through Stuart, and he can route the message to me. I want to make myself available because this is a very big problem, and if we don't collectively get our arms around this, it's not going to go away. It's just going to get worse. So I appreciate everybody's time today. Thank you for calling in, and I'll turn it back over to Stuart for Q&A.
So, Matt, we did get one question that I want to give you. I want to let everybody know we will be launching these poll questions. If you could respond to the poll questions, we would appreciate it. Right now, we only have one more question. I will ask it, and then after your answer, Kirsten, maybe I'll give it back to you for some closing thoughts and closing remarks. Matt just kind of walked through what you should do as kind of next steps immediately after this call. So if we don't get another question, that's the way we'll proceed. Matt, the question we got is, I'm at a school district that uses the Google suite of products. Any advice on what they offer for free that I could immediately implement?
Absolutely. Google offers what they call two-step verification, which is technically slightly different from two-factor authentication, but works in much the same way. It is available on the Google Suite. It should be baked into the platform for free. We are not Google Suite users, but I know that on all of my personal Google accounts, I have it enabled, and it's just under the, in my case, you know, my individual profile settings. As administrators, I'm certain that it's going to be a similar setting in there. But they do offer, it's SMS-based or Google Authenticator-based. Google Authenticator is a free app that they make available. You download it to your mobile phone. It is much more secure than SMS. In fact, I use it to authenticate to a lot of my tools, even that aren't Google-based. And I'm certain that Google offers a very tight integration with their own product there. But they do offer the two-step or two-factor authentication within their platform, both in G Suite, and if you're a Google Cloud customer as well, or anybody on the call is, they also have that baked into their platform for admin use.
Terrific. Matt, thank you very much. Kirsten, any last comments or suggested items for the people on the call that either can listen to it now or will make sure we get it in the written summary and the recording?
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Matt, because I think hearing, Matt, your focus on culture and the connection that you have with employees is a great model and example for companies of all sizes, given what you talked about as far as your size and how you're working with your franchises and your corporate headquarters. I just want to emphasize the human element of cybersecurity. We have focused so much in the past on technology solutions, and Matt laid out a lot of great steps in addition to the ones that I shared that really come from individuals. And it's not intended, I think the important point to remember as a small business is that it's not about fear. It's not scaring individuals into education, but empowering them with information and giving individuals, your employees, the opportunity to do better and creating that culture. And I did want to make one point specifically. Matt talked about collateral materials in your workforce. And one of the things that we do offer in one of the stages is we have templates of posters, of flashcards, different pieces to put in your workplace. And we actually have a picture of a small business in Egypt where the posters, the Cyber Readiness Program posters, are in their copy room and in their lunchroom. And that's exactly the type of awareness that you want to share. The only other piece that I'll mention is that one of the best ways to create a culture and start talking about these things, such as stronger passwords and passphrases and what that means, is with onboarding. You have an opportunity through human resources, because every company, regardless of size, onboards a new employee, to set the parameters and set the culture in that onboarding process. And so to talk through what you do as a company and how you focus on cybersecurity and cyber readiness and what you expect of your employees when they come on, and having just a couple basic things to remind them around passphrases and things like that can be very helpful in really setting that culture and being able to create that without having to change people's awareness, but setting that from the outset. And as Matt said as well, I'm available. Stuart obviously has my contact information. We put it up on the screen, but please don't hesitate to reach out to me as well. And we have different ways of obtaining information on the website. But this is a collaborative mission. It's wonderful to be able to partner with Matt and Taco Bell on this webinar, because as you can see, there's no competition in security. We're all trying to work together and share what we learn and get it out as easily as possible, because it's truly about raising the security for everybody and across all companies and across all regions.
Kirsten, thank you very much. That was terrific. We don't have any other questions, but if you do want to submit a question back to us, you can either submit it to me or submit it to our info @ and we will make sure we get it to Matt and to Kirsten, or you can contact them directly. Once again, we will be having another session on November 14th with the Cyber Readiness Institute around protect your data from USBs and other storage dangers. We will have someone similar to Matt on that call as well from one of our Fortune 1000 member companies to give their perspective, both from a big business standpoint and from a a sole security practitioner and small business standpoint. Thank you very much for participating in our polls. Matt, I'll turn it back over to you. We have 5 minutes. If there's any other kind of last minute comments you want to make or suggestions people ought to do, and then Kirsten, I'll let you wrap it up.
Actually, I did have a comment on one thing that Kirsten mentioned, which was onboarding training. We do that as well, and I failed to mention it, but because we had a question about training earlier, that's actually a really, really great opportunity that we all have as organizations to catch people right at the very beginning and train them or have a conversation with them about security being important to the culture of our organization, and here's how we implement that, and here are the things that we'll do. And at that point, we can walk them through, the password manager, how to get set up, how to use it, the multi-factor authentication that we use, how that's important, how to use that. We give them some actually, really practical, actionable training that they really do need in order to do their jobs. But additionally, we talk about how important security is to the culture here, because I think at no point in somebody's career journey are they more receptive to understanding what the company's culture is than during onboarding training on day one. Everybody comes in bright-eyed. They really want to understand, how do I work in this culture? What's this company all about? And so prioritizing cybersecurity during the onboarding is actually a really great opportunity. And so I'm really glad you brought that up, Kirsten, because that's something that we do here as well. I don't have any additional closing remarks other than what I've already said, but please, if you when we hang up the phone today, if you take away just a couple of things, it was remember those 4 things: default passwords, password managers, multi-factor authentication, and then most importantly, educate and talk to your users. We are all in this together, and it's going to take all of us to solve this problem, but the good news is we can all do it regardless of who we are, what size organization we're in.
Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate you taking the time. Our CISO founders wanted to make sure we provided these kind of open webinars to give back to the community, to make sure all people could be smarter and stronger and safer. I will tell you on the poll question, did you find it valuable? 100% of the people said they found it valuable, and 83% of the people said they learned something that they can immediately implement to make their organization stronger and safer. So thank you so much for that. And Kirsten, I'll just turn it over to you for any closing comments, and then we'll hang up.
Thank you, Stuart. Again, thanks very much, Matt, for the collaboration, but thanks very much to Stuart and the Cybersecurity Collaborative for your support in this and for the efforts that you are taking on and continue to be committed to. As again, we'll say it again, but it's so important. The collaboration and us all working together is what will have the impact. And I appreciate everybody who joined today for listening, for your responsiveness in the poll. And as Matt and I said, and Stuart, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. And I do hope you'll take the time just to log on to the website, and any feedback that you have to the www.cyberreadinessinstitute.org will be very much appreciated. Thank you, Stuart. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everybody, and we'll talk to you again in November, if not before.